As many of you know, and as some of you may not, we work with EBRI a lot. EBRI is a very important organization in the industry that does a lot of independent research and really helps promote employee retirements, workers of America being able to retire, and for us to be able to make decisions based on actual and real data. So it's uh, so nice to have this opportunity today. And there's a lot we're going to be going through, and there's a lot that we work with EBRI on a regular basis. And wanted to let you know that Brett has actually been and is a trustee of the board. So he's Capital's representative, he's on the board. And he's also going to be chair of the research committee. So there are some people who are very involved with EBRI. EBRI has a lot of information that we suspect that we could make greater use of going forward. So think about that as you hear about the things today, and definitely interact and ask any questions. So we are very fortunate to have 3 people from EBRI: Lori Lucas, who's the president and CEO, and Zara Ibrahimi is a research associate and has done an enormous amount of work kind of developing personas, and Jack Vanderhei, who's the research director. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Lori, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and glad to be here and really happy that everyone was able to make time in their busy schedules. And thank you so much, Tony, for putting this together. Greatly appreciate it. I'm hoping my computer doesn't, it's doing a little freezing a moment ago. If it does, I will resort to joining back on my phone. Yeah, we have a very great relationship with your organization, and really want to just take the opportunity to thank you all for all that you do. There are 34 people from the Capital Group American Funds that on a very regular basis participate in EBRI events, and I'll talk more about that. And of course, Brett very generously willing to give his time to be the chair of the research committee, which is a big obligation. So we really appreciate that. And I will share my screen because we do have some slides to share with you, and we will be recording this in case anyone is not able to attend and wants to listen to it on their own. So you can have that for posterity. But what we wanted to cover today was just an update on who we are in case anyone is not as familiar with the Employee Benefit Research Institute. I'll then quickly turn it over to Zara to talk about some of her research. And we brainstormed on the different research topics that might be of interest. And as Tony said, we want to make this really as interactive as possible. So we have a bunch of slides, but it's really meant to be a conversation. Again, your organization has been very active in things like our household spending and retirement study that Zara will cover. I will cover our initiatives in financial wellness, as well as Jack Vanderhei will cover that. We'll talk to you about how we've integrated recently with the JP Morgan Chase database. It's a very exciting new source of data for us. Jack will explain his retirement security projection model and some of the work he's doing on the Secure Act and the CARES Act. That's really important for policymakers and among others. And then he'll follow up on a possible glide path project that comes from a conversation that happened a couple years ago with a similar group at your organization. So a little brainstorming on that. I will give you an update on the Public Retirement Research Lab and leave you with a roadmap of some of the research that's to come at EBRI over the next year or so. And then we'll talk about next steps that, ways we can work together with our organizations. And I think, for us, what we really hope is to hear is a lot of what resonates with you and what fits your research priorities as well. So for EBRI 101, here's our mission. And really, we're about, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. The mission is really about, as I think Tony put it artfully, actual real data and analysis that's unbiased, objective, and nonpartisan based on that data. And we'll talk a bit about our databases and some of the sources of our data. But we have access to a tremendous wealth of information on 401k, IRAs, now the consumer database, and all of that comes together in allowing us to do the type of research we're going to talk about today. We asked in our last, I guess it was in our December meeting with our trustees, what word they would use to describe EBRI. And you could see thought leadership came up, it was very top of mind for our trustees that we are a thought leader, but also that we're objective, data-driven, unbiased. We have a lot of integrity, influence. So these are some of the ways that we're perceived in turn, and it's exactly how we hope to be perceived in our role in the benefits world. What it means to be a sustaining EBRI member, which your organization is as Tony said, you have a board seat on the board, and the board guides the organization, that guides EBRI, and helps build relationships with major industry players. I mean, we have a who's who of industry players, as well as plan sponsors, consultants, and associations, and even some government agencies participate regularly in EBRI. Brett and others also help shape the organization's research agenda through participation in things like the EBRI Research Committee and the Public Policy Advisory Council. And I'm happy to say, I think your organization does a really great job participating, and it's a broad participation. As I said, there's 34 people that we regularly count attending our various meetings. We always want more. The more, the better is our view of it. But I think your organization does do a really good job taking advantage of the opportunities to participate in our meetings. You also have access to all of our research, from things as high level as our infographics to our in-depth issue briefs. You get the ability to see them, get a first look at them as well in our research committee meetings. And also there's a lot of research that's not available to the public that's available to you as a member. We invite you often to participate in our conferences and webinars. Most recently last week, Brett moderated our research roundup, and we really appreciate that. But it also gives you an ability to showcase, not only moderate, but showcase your work as well. And we're happy to have you participate in many of those opportunities. And then one thing that I did want to point out to you that I'm not sure you've taken advantages of is ability to provide free plan sponsor membership to strategic partners. So we feel like it's a good opportunity for you, if you know of plan sponsors that you think would really enjoy the benefits of EBRI membership. You can give those plan sponsors free membership, and that's part of your membership is to select a handful of plan sponsors that you think would be good. It would be a good investment for you in those relationships. So that's, and one last thing before I turn it over to Zara for the research. Here's the three committees I mentioned: the Research Agenda Planning Committee, In Progress Research Committee meeting, and Public Policy Advisory Council. These all meet regularly and in person. Unfortunately, our in-person meetings have been put on hold, but we did have our policy forum just a few weeks ago, and we had our research committee and our board meeting in May. And we will have, we don't know whether we're going to have anything in person in December, but normally we would have our next set of meetings for the research committee and the board would be in December. If we don't do it in person, we will certainly be doing it virtually. So, but that's to be determined. I will stop there and entertain any questions before I turn it over to Zara. Zara, did you I'll stop. Why don't I stop sharing and you can take over the screen.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Capital Group, for having us, and thanks, Tony, for a great introduction, and thanks, Lori, for setting things up. So, as Lori mentioned in her introduction, today I'm going to talk a little bit about some preliminary results that I'm having from the research that I'm currently going through. So this research, I mean, my main focus in EBRI is looking, using HRS dataset and looking at the spending pattern of older Americans, basically. And here I'm looking at this topic from a different perspective. So just to give you an introduction that what is HRS is, so Health and Retirement Survey, which we call HRS, is a nationally representative sample of the US older population here. And it started in 1992, and every 2 years they are basically interviewing again the people that are in the sample. And also every 6 years they are adding new people to the sample. So it's an ongoing survey basically, and they try to keep it to be a representative sample of the current older population here in the US. So this survey has multiple supplements. One of the most important ones is the CAMS study, which they survey basically a subsample of the people in the HRS with only one objective, and that is to basically track and measure consumption of those households. And here in this study, so one of the great things is that these two data sets, it's possible to integrate them. So we are able to see the consumption behavior of these people from the CAMS, and also we are able to see their other data in HRS and do our analysis. In this study, I'm using HRS between 2004 and 2016, which is the last year that is available currently. I mean, they added raw data for 2018, but the CAMS is not available yet to use that. So the latest available was between until 2016 that I'm using here, and also CAMS that are surveyed in between years, basically. So in 2005 to 17. So I'm using these waves of the survey to study the spending pattern of the people in the sample, and I divide them into 3 age groups: those that are between the age of 50 and 64, those that are between 65 and 74, and those who are 75 and older. As you can see here, the number of people in my sample are 36% in the youngest cohort between 50 and 64, and I have 36% between 65 and 74, and I have 26% of those who are 75 and older. So you would hear me talk about total spending, just give you a definition of what I mean by total spending. Every time I talk about it, I mean the total of the expenses that are listed here. So they are housing expenses that are basically any mortgages, rents, any home repairs costs that are, these are counted as housing expenses. It includes food expenses that they don't include dining out, but they will include everything that are spent on food. They include out-of-pocket medical expenditures, and they include transportation costs, clothing, entertainment, and also other expenses. So I will talk about the total spending as well as each of these categories individually. And you will also hear me talk about total income. So in HRS, we have measures of income for labor income. So households are surveyed on their labor income and also their capital income. We also know about their pension and annuity income. We know about their social security, and everything else goes to category that are called other income. Those could be things like Social Security, disability benefits, any unemployment and workers' compensation, anything that is not listed on the other four. So every time I would talk about total income is the total of these categories. You would also hear me talk about net total wealth. And by that, I mean the total of the value of their primary residence, the vehicles that they own, individual IRAs, 401ks, and any financial assets that they have. And because it's net, all the mortgages and home loans and other debts are subtracted from this number. So from here, the first slide that I'm showing shows how, on average, how people are spending as they grow older, and also the individual categories that I mentioned earlier. So right from here, you will see that as for the older age group, we will see that the average spending is lower than those who are younger in the sample. So this is the first one. And also you would see that with regard to the housing is always the major category that people are spending on. But you see that basically housing expenditure goes down as we move towards the older age group. With regard to the food, you will see that we don't see much of a change in average amount of food that people are spending. With regard to clothing, the same. It goes a little bit narrower, but not too much. And with regard to health, probably it's not clear here. We will see that it doesn't change by much. It's not narrower or wider, but if we consider that the total household spending is going down, and that amount that you're spending on out-of-pocket medical expenditure stays the same, and also taking into account that after the age 65, people are having Medicare, we'll see that basically the share of health costs are going up in household expenditure as they grow older. We can also see that the transportation cost is going down as people grow older, and we can see that the entertainment costs are going down, and also the gifts and contribution, it seems like it's going up in household budget as they grow older. It's narrower in the younger age group, and it's wider as they grow older. But what we saw so far, it's basically the average, how people are behaving on average and what is their consumption. But not everyone behaves as a typical older American. So from there, we're interested to know, are there any household that are spending or allocating their budget that is different from the norm, basically. So from there, we would categorize our sample based on people who would call here home spender, health spender, discretionary spender, and everyone else that we call them average spender. So those who are home spenders, that we consider them home spenders, are those who spend 60% or more of their budget on housing costs. Those who we call health spenders are the ones that spend 20% or more of their budget on healthcare. And also those that we call discretionary spenders are those that spend 25% or more of their budget on entertainment, and also gifts and contribution. As I mentioned, the residuals are going to the average spender because we don't see, and we call them average because basically we don't see any drastic allocation in their budget into one specific category. So from there, if you look at our 3 age categories, those who are in the younger age group, we see that, for example, 21% of them are categorized as home spender, and these percentage goes down as we move towards older ages. In both 65 and 74 years old, and those 75 plus, we have 17%, which is lower than that, which it should not come as a surprise because people are basically paying their mortgages by that age. And we would expect that not seeing as many as people that we see in the younger age cohort that have basically spending 60% or more of their budget on housing. But we still see them in the older age groups as well. So the second one is the health spender. We only see that like 10% of people in the younger age cohort that spend 20% and more on health. But as they grow older, we see that 14% and 20% in those who are over the age 75 that are spending 20% and more health on their out-of-pocket medical expenditure. And also for the discretionary spender, we see that only 13% of people in the younger age cohort would spend 25% or a quarter of their budget on entertainment and contribution, but that percentage is going up as people are growing older. And the average spender, basically what we call average spender that doesn't have any drastic allocation, basically goes down as people grow older. From here, this is what we learned from camps. We try to understand a little bit about the characteristics of these people from the HRS. Oh no, before that, I should also mention that for each of these spending categories, you would also look at the individual, how much they're spending on each of these individual categories of spending. So for example, if we take the average spender as our base, we would see that our discretionary spender by design, by definition, they're spending too much on their gifts and contribution. But you will see that in general, their total spending is so high that they don't have to sacrifice anything else in their budget basically to achieve that one. So that shows us like these people who are discretionary spending are those who are basically having a larger budget. If we compare those health spenders and home spenders with the one that we call average spender, we'll see that again, the home spender by design, by definition, they're spending too much on their housing, but they are not able to spend as much as the average spender on their transportation, for example, or on their entertainment in order to cover their home expenses. So their total expenditures are not that different from the average spender, but they are allocating their budget. They have to sacrifice basically or cut from other categories to be able to cover their home expenses. And we see similar things for the health spenders. So we would do this similar analysis basically for the 65 and 74. Again, we would see that those who are in the discretionary spending having a larger budget basically, but we don't see the health spender and home spender or spending, like their average spending is the same, but they have to allocate their budget differently in order to be able to spend that amount on health and also on their home spender. For example, even though the home spender and health spender's total budget is not that different, the home spender is a little bit more, but we see that they have to spend or they choose to spend. I mean, we can't observe if they have to or they choose, but they have to spend much less on their health, for example, in order to be able to have the budget for their housing expenditures. And similarly, we do the same analysis for those in our 75 and 85. And from here, we will try to learn a little bit more about the background, what is the characteristics of these people. So we would start with the first age category, and from there we can also see the spending profiles in the older age groups as well. So here we would look at those who are in our youngest age cohort by the profiles that I mentioned, the average spender, the discretionary spender, health spender, and home spender, and we would look at their marital status and their education. So Again, for example, if you take the average spender as our base, you would see that the discretionary spender people are on average, it seems like they are more likely to be coupled than the average spender. And also when we look at the education, we would see that the discretionary spender, if we again compare it to the average spender and also the other categories, we would see that they are more likely to be the college educated ones. Things like that, for example, we are interested to know. And also if you look at the home spender, you would see that and compare it to the average spender, you would see that they are more likely to be single than couple, for example. And here, if we look at how their income is distributed and also their wealth, again, if we take the average spender as base, you would see that those in the discretionary spender are having much larger income, and also, I mean, in comparison, much larger income, and they're wealthier, basically. I mean, this was also kind of clear from their large budget as well. But we can see here that they are able basically to cover the expenses because they are wealthier and they have higher income. And we also see that those that are home spenders are compared to the average spenders, they are less wealthy and they have lower income in general than people in other spending profiles. We do some similar analysis again for the 65 and 74. We would similarly see that again, our discretionary spenders are those that are more likely to be a couple. And we also see that they are more likely than average to be a college educated people. And again, we will see that those who are home spenders are more likely to be single and also more likely to not have a college education. And similarly, you will see that for those in 65 and 74 for distribution in income and wealth. We see that similarly discretionary people are wealthier, but we see that the home spenders are not necessarily similar to our younger age cohort from those who have, like, very low income. It seems like it's probably a little bit more by choice as people are growing older to choose to be, rather than like being able to afford. And similarly, we see that the same analysis for those who are 75 and 85. We see that again, but I mean, what is different here, we see that for the discretionary spenders, we will see that the average spender here is, before we saw that there was a chance of 50-50 between couple and a single households, but here we see that at the oldest age group, we have more single people than couple, basically, that we consider them average. And as a result, we see that that behavior is not that much of a difference in the discretionary spenders between singles and couples. Singles are similarly likely to be discretionary spenders than couples when we go to this age group. And again, we will see the similar analysis for the 75 and 85. And as I mentioned, and we have again those discretionary spenders are those that are able to basically afford that. They are wealthy and they have higher income. And also, but again, we don't see that the home spenders be the ones that have low income. It seems like it's more by choice than necessity. So the main takeaways here is that we try to categorize people in different age groups. We divided them between those that we call them average spender, home spender, health spender, and discretionary spender. This is a typo, it shouldn't be leisure. And we divided them by different characteristics. And for example, we observed that people that we call them discretionary spenders are more likely to be wealthy and have a high income at every age. And if they're younger than 75, they're more likely to be coupled than single. We also observed that home spenders are more likely to be single and have low income and wealth. So the next steps in this research is that we would like to learn about more characteristics and factors that are correlated with this behavior. We would like to know how household spending profiles are related to asset the accumulation behavior of people. And also we would be interested to know, do people change basically their spending profiles because they want to preserve or spend their assets. So I would be happy to hear any questions or any recommendations that you have for this research. Thank you.
And this is really part of a larger project. We call it the Retirement Personas Project, which is really geared to parsing out the differences, as Zara has, in terms of retirement spending, so that it can be used in things like retirement spend down tools, and we can kind of personalize the retirement spending experience the way that we personalize the accumulation experience for employees. And so with that, we're actually just in the process of beginning to develop a survey questionnaire where we're asking people why they're spending the way that Zara has observed. We know from Zara's research how they're spending, but why are they doing so? And we think that will add a lot to the conversation in terms of like the a good example is a home spender. Are they restricting themselves to home spending because that's they just want to stick around home and spend time with their grandkids, or are they actually afraid to spend because they don't want to run out of money in retirement? Those are really two very different motivations.
So are you taking questions now, or should we wait to the end for questions?
No, please do.
Hi, so I'm Michael Bowman with the Capital Group, and my question is, have you broken it down for those with pensions versus those without? So how does this look if somebody, the people with pensions more likely to be, in which group? So I don't know if you guys have broken down pension versus defined contribution plan in your analysis. More specifically for public plans that have both. How does that work?
Yeah, no, in this research so far, I have looked at CAMs and also the consumption behavior. So we are at the beginning of looking at, the income and wealth side. That's why you just saw, the total income and total wealth, not the categories that are included inside that. But we have other research that looks at regular income that people are having from the pension side, and then we would look to see at how that changes people's spending and also spending on different categories in the past.
But I think to kind of to your point, perhaps Michael, is the cohort that's in retirement now may look very maybe very different from the people that are coming into retirement. We actually did a study based on HRS CAMS about 2 years ago that did see people with pensions. They really try to restrict their spending to the pension income, so they spend a lot less than people without pensions. So the spending patterns clearly may change once we see fewer and fewer people with pensions.
Hey, Lori and Zara, this is Brett. I'm just going to add to that. There was a particular interest in public plans, I think, and of course there's some data issues that the more fine-grained you get in terms of slicing up the data, you can run out of room in the data. But the other thing is that Lori, EBRI, as you know, EBRI has a project they're doing with a sister organization on public plans. If you want to mention it.
Oh, yeah. We are doing some research on very similar research to all that we're going to talk about today, but on the public, state plans, 457s primarily, municipalities and so forth, which of course the, DB has to really be taken into account in a way that we can kind of not be as concerned about on the defined contribution side of corporate plans because they have, far fewer people have defined benefit plans on the corporate side. that being said, we're really in the very initial stages, and I actually have a couple of slides later on of all of this research, but Capital Group is involved in it, I'm happy to say. You are a founding member of what we call the Public Retirement Research Lab, and we've got a lot of exciting developments. I'll talk about it in a little bit when we get to those slides.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Zara, I will take back, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I will go ahead and share mine again, and then we can talk about financial wellness. So we're, this is, as they say in Monty Python now, for something completely different. So we started our Financial Wellness Research Center 2.5 years ago when I started at EBRI. Actually, my executive committee, when I came on board, said, this is a incredibly important topic, and Laura, you really need to consider this as a corner, kind of a pillar, a key pillar of EBRI, just like retirement and health benefits is. And so we took that very seriously, and we've begun to create a database similar to our other databases. So Jack, in a moment, will talk about research that we do based on the 27 million participants in our 401k database. We have a database that we'll talk about, our consumer database that has 22 million, is based on 22 million consumers. We have an IRA database of 20 million IRA holders, HSAs, 10 million HSA accounts, and the financial wellness database will feed into all of these, looking at the initiatives that employers offer to employees and their impact on financial wellness outcomes. And Jack will talk a moment about that. But to start off with, what we wanted to do before we mined that database was really understand what employers were trying to accomplish with their employee financial wellness initiative and how they were measuring success. So we started 2 years ago, this will be our third year actually, that we are fielding the employer financial well-being survey of employee initiatives. And this is a survey that is geared towards primarily employers 500 employees and more, so a bit on the larger side. And the other criteria is that they have to at least have some interest in financial wellness initiatives. They can't say, no, I don't care about this. The good news, at least a couple of years ago, the vast majority of employers have at least some interest in financial wellness initiatives. And you can see, according to this slide, they're not only interested, but most of them are pretty concerned. 26% in 2018 and 22% in 2019 said they were very concerned, or highly concerned. I'm rating their concern 9 to 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, with the average level of concern at about 8. So employers are pretty concerned about financial wellness, and this survey was fielded last year, so that they were concerned before the coronavirus. Our current survey is in the field right now, and we're anticipating we will see a great deal more concern than we saw last year. How they are approaching financial wellness initiatives, the majority said that they were currently offering, although you could see, according to last year, 2019 analysis at least, 1 in 5 said that they were actively implementing. And this is something that we want to see how this played out, because our concern is that employers might be putting the brakes on some of these initiatives, primarily because they're paying for them by and large. And I'll talk about that in a moment. When we're talking about financial wellness initiatives, we have a very broad brush when we're talking about what they are. It's everything from very traditional financial wellness initiatives such as tuition reimbursement and employee discount programs and just basic money management tools and planning, to things like the more cutting-edge student loan debt assistance, things like what Abbott is doing in actually putting money into the 401k plan if somebody pays down their student loan debt, to payroll advance loans to the employer, or even instant access to your pay. The thing I think that's important for you to take away from this slide again is some of these newer initiatives like the student loan debt and debt management services. They're not that common, but a lot of employers said that they were planning to offer them. 1 in 4 said student loan debt, and things like gamification, it was, even higher than that. 28% said that they were planning to offer. We'll find out, in a few months, based on our current survey, whether that actually played out given the pandemic. As I said, the vast majority of these initiatives are paid for by the employer, at least in part. 94% of employers said that they pay some or all of the costs of the financial wellness initiative, with many of them paying all of the costs. 46% saying they paid all of the costs. Sometimes it is coming from reducing a budget and spending on other non-benefit expenses. 27% said that. Sometimes they're just negotiating additional services from existing benefit provider. 42% said that. But 31% said they made a brand new investment to offer these. So that's why it could be on the cutting board, just like we're seeing matches and 401k plans being cut. So as I keep alluding to, we have a survey that we're very eager to see the results on, the 2020 Financial Wellness Survey, which will focus on COVID-19's impact. We're actually pairing it with a workplace wellness survey, which is an employee survey that will have some similar questions. So then and they're being fielded at the exact same time. So we'll be able to see, this is what employers saying they're willing to do, but here's what employees said that they want, and see what differences we find. All of this will be released in our symposium. It obviously will probably be a virtual symposium that is planned for September. And the other thing I wanted to bring your attention to, we'll have a separate student loan debt issue brief that you'll see on the research roadmap at the end. But our really exciting new initiative that we're hoping we'll be able to see more of this year as well is our database. So I'll turn that over to Jack to talk about the Financial Wellness Research Center database.
Thank you, Lori. Can I get the screen, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lori. And I'd like to thank everybody, Capital Group, for being here today and for setting up this opportunity to share some of our results. Those of you that have been part of our Financial Wellness Research Center in the past know that we've been trying very hard to put together a database. One of the things that we found very quickly was trying to go for everything we wanted in one fell swoop just simply was not going to work. So we tried to, in essence, parse this out into two different phases. The first one we're actively working on now that will look only at 401k information. So for example, we have 500 employers right now that we're working with that are giving us time series data on the financial well-being interventions. We're able to find out both who's eligible and who has utilized these various initiatives. And then we've integrated that with the 401k database that Lori mentioned earlier. Using a secure hash, we have no personally identifiable information whatsoever, but we are able to link over this time series of 401k information, basically, as I said, who's eligible and who has utilized these various financial wellness interventions that the employer is offering. So what we're planning on doing is analyzing the impact of those initiatives on the following 401k activities. We're going to break it down by demographic segment. We can do it by age, we can do it by wage, we can do it by tenure. We can also look at things like the level of their account balances, et cetera. But we're going to try to decipher how much these different initiatives impact participation decisions, contribution decisions, asset allocation, because we're very concerned about whether or not people have necessarily enough money in safe investments, especially if there's not some fund available for them to be able to easily access during an emergency. probably the last two are the ones that the people we're working with care about most. We want to see how these different financial well-being initiatives will impact on loan activity and also withdrawals. One of the other things that is going to be available, certainly we don't expect every employer to take advantage of it, is we will be using the simulation model I'll be talking about in a couple of seconds to also look at what the overall impact on their retirement balances would be at any particular age, typically age 65, and try to do, in essence, 500 different white papers, one for each of these employers, to be able to give them some kind of, I guess, cost-benefit analysis, if nothing else, on each of these initiatives. Now, that's certainly not where we want to end up. As Lori mentioned, this is certainly much more of a holistic endeavor, and we're trying to basically use phase one more or less to get our foot in the door, because what we really want to do is on the right-hand side under phase two to get some of this holistic data. And what we hope to be able to do, because we have the 401k information on the left-hand side and can turn that around relatively quickly, we've had a lot of interest in employers giving us information on things like absenteeism, productivity, different firm-specific ROI components. But obviously, we're going to have to go through a much more rigorous level of security once we start doing that type of analysis. So we're hoping that armed with the free analysis we've given them on the 401k only, we're going to be able to get, I mean, certainly not 100% of those 500 employers, but enough that we'll be able to start doing research, start doing white papers on that, and hopefully then expand just from that subset of 500 employers to a much bigger network of employers going forward. So that's all I wanted to say for now on the Financial Wellbeing Research Center database project. Were there any questions or comments I could respond to?
Hi, Jack. I just had a comment on the financial well-being research. I think it's probably an important component to take a look at this research in conjunction with things like menu offerings. And I see that just the plans to take a look at not only the participation and contribution, but also things like leakage, withdrawals, and asset allocation. I think that could be really valuable to plan sponsors as well as investors like ourselves, since we don't just have one set of tools. It's not just the menu offerings, but it's also the benefits such as financial wellness that each employer offers that can help the participants reach an optimal decision. It's the onus isn't necessarily always on perfecting the product for every demographic. It's also in the complementary benefits that allow them to use it best.
Well, excellent point, Naomi, and we certainly do plan to utilize we know, for example, the entire investment menu, each of these 500 employers have provided their employees, and in some cases, how they've changed from year to year, which I think is going to be even probably more exciting when we are able to combine that with some of the financial well-being intervention analysis. So that will definitely all be included in what we plan to look at. Anything else on the database project? I'm sorry.
Hey, Jack, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, this is Amit Gadiali from our analytics team. Just curious, I'm assuming these 500 employers are probably on the larger plan size, right? $1 billion plus potentially, or maybe 500 million plus?
Actually, we have an entire range, and the reason we came up with such a ad hoc number of 500 is we've broken it down into 5 different size categories and 10 different industries. And we're trying to get, and we asked for 10, cell count of 10 in each of these. So we will definitely be able to cover the entire range. We're looking at size in terms of number of participants.
Got it. And then from a data access perspective, once you guys pull it all together, will members, EBRI members, have access to this data to kind of go and look at a specific company or specific range of companies to get a sense of what's going on, or will it just be based on the research you guys publish?
I'd say a hybrid answer. Because of the confidentiality agreements we have with every one of our record keepers, and especially now when we start going to the employer-specific information, we can never allow anyone to access the raw data. What we have done many, many times in the past, though, in terms of both the 401k and IRA data, is if a member asks for special runs, we're more than happy to do that. We'll just never, though, be able to identify any particular employer. But hopefully, if you want to take a look at a breakout, within an industry segment, for example, to look at that as a breakout by plan size, also assuming that's not something we've already published. Again, as long as we absolutely positively keep the confidentiality of the employer, and until I have everybody in, I can't tell you how many companies I need to group together to mask their identity. But as long as we can keep it confidential, I have no problems doing special runs.
Got it. No, I think this could be pretty powerful. So yeah, look forward to seeing how that all lands. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else on the database project? Okay, then I'm going to jump to the JP Morgan Chase database project that Lori mentioned. I've only got a single slide here. Thus far, we've done one preliminary analysis, but I want to spend more time talking to you about what we're in the process of doing that nobody has seen yet. And again, this is the collaboration of looking at our 401k database, which has 27 million 401k participants. Again, this is all administrative data. We have 24 million IRA accounts, and then we have Chase data on 22 million consumers. Again, it's the same kind of hash that I just described. There's no personally identifiable information around, but because we have all of the record keepers, including JP Morgan, use the secure hash, adopting a key that we at EBRI do not have, we're able to combine basically, we translate the 9-digit SSNs into 64-character hash, and those 64-character hashes are unique to any particular individual, and we're able to combine them. Thus far, we've got an overlap population, just looking at the K only, of about 1.4 million individuals. And we're in the process, literally this week, of integrating it with the IRA data. So I would suspect, given proportionalities, we're probably going to be up to about 2.6, 2.7 million when we get done with that. On the right-hand side, some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with the types of analyses JP Morgan has done using the Chase data, but we have very specific information on housing, transportation, food and beverage, travel, apparel and services, entertainment, educational, charitable contributions, and healthcare. We also have information on where they're located, so we can do things like cost of living adjustments, etc. What we're doing right now is basically putting together a longitudinal database going from 2013 through 2018 inclusive, that has all of our IRA and 401k information and all of their spending, and we'll be focusing primarily on people who have already been coded by JP Morgan as having retired. So we're not going to use just some artificial date as a retirement. Because they do have the income component for these individuals, they're able to figure out using their algorithms when somebody is actually retired. So we'll be able to take a very close look, something similar to what Zara was talking about, as to how their spending changes over time. The thing that I'm probably more excited about than anything I've done in a long, long time is we can also, since we'll have the very specific information on their K and their IRA balances, we'll be able to see how retirement spending changes with the amount of available resources. So whether it is through a major modification because of investment gain or loss, or whether they seem to be spending down too quickly and they seem to get to some threshold that starts influencing those expenses. That's something that, again, hopefully with 2 million plus in this overall group, we should have easily, several 100,000 observations just for the retirees that we'll be able to track on this longitudinal basis. So if anyone's interested, just let me know. I can keep you up to date as far as where we're going, but that's something we're definitely shooting for in terms of an October publication coming up this year. So any questions on the JP Morgan collaborative research?
This is Tony, and I don't have any questions, but I think it could be just so helpful in seeing how retirees may stay in plan over time and how that may hopefully will increase over time.
Right. And we're certainly planning on continuing this out. I mean, as we get the 2019 K and IRA data, we'll be able to expand this. We also hopefully can go backwards in time a little bit. It's just that was the earliest year that JP Morgan had at this particular time. But hopefully we'll be able to increase the duration of that time series relatively quickly.
That's great.
If there's nothing else on that, I'm going to go very, very, very quickly through the retirement security projection model. Brett had me out in LA a couple of years ago, and I don't know how many of you might have been in the audience that day, but I think Brett gave me 2.5 hours to go through what I'm about to do in about 20 seconds. So don't blink, you're going to miss this. The retirement security projection model is something that Craig Copeland and I put together in the late 90s, primarily to look at retirement income adequacy on a national basis. And what we're doing with this is having both an accumulation phase and a decumulation phase. We look at all U.S. households 35 to 64. We combine primary elements of retirement, wealth and income, DC, IRA, Social Security, DB, and net housing equity. The reason the last two are underlined was somehow that got omitted from this slide. So if you have a hard copy, just make sure you realize that's actually part of it. We have the actual administrative data on the case side. As we mentioned, I've got annual linked records, tens of millions of people going back to 96. We're using Social Security on a current statutory basis for the baseline, although we do much sensitivity analysis for scenarios in which a trust fund is exhausted, which, given the current pandemic situation, many suggest is going to be sooner than what they had been expecting the last time they did the trustees report. What I want to spend just a couple seconds on is we have something that I think makes us a lot different than a number of certainly think tanks, in that we don't just simply do replacement rates. We have a full-blown stochastic decumulation model. We do 1,000 alternative life paths for each household. We start at 65 as a baseline, but we can certainly vary that. Deterministic modeling of many of the types of costs that Zara just mentioned are in there, but we also have the stochastic modeling, so we can bring in longevity risk, we can bring in post-retirement investment risk, and we can bring in long-term care costs. So that's all basically baked into this. What we have is output, and certainly we can vary this, but these numbers are aggregated across all households in the cohort, currently expressed in 2019 dollars. We look at basically those people who are simulated to run short of money in retirement, and we find what we refer to as retirement savings shortfall. I've just updated that in January, and I now have an aggregate of about $3.7 trillion. That's how much more money in today's dollars these households would need in their accounts after taxes to cover the simulated shortfalls going forward. Since that's only about 40% of the households, obviously that's missing a big part of the picture. So we also do retirement savings surpluses, which is just the present value of how much they have available at the end of life. And then if you want to combine those two, we have a retirement savings net surplus, which is basically the second bullet point in red minus the first bullet point in red. We're getting really short on time, so I'm not going to go through the next couple of slides. If you're interested, though, on how we determine whether or not a household's considered to run short of money in the simulation model, you can take a closer look at slides 39 and 40, or just feel free to drop me a line. I'd be more than happy to explain that. What I wanted to do is spend just a couple minutes looking at one quick output that we had from basically the CARES analysis we just got done looking at, and also the Secure Act that we looked at the beginning of the year. What we try to take from this particular slide is what are the most important components, certainly that we can model, and we're looking at the retirement savings shortfalls. We put in the open MEPs or the PEPs. We put in increasing the cap on the auto escalation on the safe harbor. We put in the required coverage of long-term part-time employees. And then we assumed, based on a survey that Prudential had done, that for small employers who are not currently offering a plan, there's going to be about a 30 to 31% take-up rate in terms of going with an open MEP or a PEP. What these numbers illustrate, and obviously they're broken out by age, and as you would expect, anything like this is going to have a bigger impact on the younger employees. If you're on the verge of retirement already, there's not a whole lot of defined contribution change is going to be able to do for you. But we find that, for example, where that red rectangle is, for those 35 to 39, overall there's about a 5.3% decrease in their deficits, in their retirement savings shortfalls. But if you're working for an employer with less than 100 employees, because as we realize there's a much smaller overall probability of offering a retirement plan for those small employees, it's a 10.7% decrease in deficits. Between 100 and 500 employees, it's about 8.6%. Be happy to send you the full study if you're interested. We have this broken out in several different components, but I just wanted to give you a quick example of what we did basically on the Secure Act. And then most recently on the CARES Act, we have an issue brief that's either coming out this week or next week. Spent a lot of time modeling basically what's the worst case assumption for people who take advantage of some of these different flexibilities. That's going to assume A, the employer offers them, B, the employee takes advantage of it, and C, the employee takes full advantage of it. So if you're talking about somebody who's got at least a $100,000 account balance and they take a CRD, they go for the whole 100 grand. Just very quickly, you see under the first scenario for employee taking the full withdrawal up to 100 grand who doesn't pay it back, we're finding that the retirement balances, this is different than the full-blown retirement savings shortfall, is in the median, having about a 20% decrease when you look at it overall age groups. If they take the full withdrawal but have a 3-year payback, it decreases substantially down to about 2.3. If they take a new loan up to 100 grand and have a dollar for dollar offset against employee contributions when they pay it back, it goes to about a 5.9% decrease. And then since some people suggested it seems like every 10 years somehow we have some kind of catastrophe that we're allowing people to dip into the retirement funds. If something like this, a CRD, would happen every 10 years, obviously the impact would be much, much larger. On the worst case scenario, it goes all the way up to about 54%. So those are the numbers to scare you in the middle column. If you want to say, but not every employer is going to offer, not every employee is going to take it, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doing some also preliminary aggregate analysis, and you can see for the first and the third rows how much that decreases. For example, on the withdrawals, you go from about a 20% worst case scenario to only a 0.43% in aggregate. And on these new loans, even with the dollar for dollar offset, you go from about 5.9 all the way down to 0.3%. So again, this is something that we'll have coming out either this week or next week. Any particular questions or comments on that, just please let me know. Also, Brett made a very, very good suggestion to look at some of these situations by the replacement rate that they had been basically on track to achieve, so we can also see of those people who get hit, basically how much of a difference it's going to make in terms of, at least as a proxy for their overall retirement income adequacy. Last thing I want to do.
Jack, if you can go back to the prior one. And this kind of ties in with the financial wellness stuff as well. If you look at that very last row, employees taking a full withdrawal up to $100,000 every 10 years, no payback. Basically, people using their 401k like a piggy bank, which we're definitely seeing. And, you know, so there's a lot of discussion about what the policy implications are for that, you know, and thinking ahead in terms of how do we shore up the system so that people are not forced to use their 401k as their emergency savings plan, basically.
Right.
Any questions before Jack moves on?
Okay, the last one, and I'm sorry.
I was just going to make a comment about how we are certainly interested in looking at success rates, and not only success rates by one measure of income replacement. So just the methodology behind the shortfall and surpluses is of great interest to us. And then similarly, as Lori mentioned, just looking at the intersection with financial wellness and how that might affect outcomes is also of great interest.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to do, Naomi, is tie this in with that previous study I mentioned on FWRC. Whether or not the employers are asking for it, I want to see how much of a difference we can make in terms of overall retirement income adequacy output metrics on these different initiatives we're finding. I suggest that it's going to be something that would just glaze the eyes of most employers, but I think from an overall public policy perspective, it's going to be very useful to start acquiring that kind of information.
It will also be useful for us because then, I mean, you can, it will help us help plan sponsors too. What other tools do you actually need in addition to a good investment menu?
Right, and as I said, and we'll be able to segment that by various demographic categories too. And so obviously it's not going to be a one broad brush approach to this. Okay, so I've got just a couple of minutes left. I want to make sure I spend some time on this possible glide path approach. The punchline is we haven't done this yet. When I was out in LA for that lecture that Brett scheduled a couple of years ago. We had probably the most amazing professional lunch I've ever had. There were several dozen people around, and we talked about things such as how this model could be used to try to figure out the cost-benefit analysis of customizing TDF glide paths to the point where one has the various optimal outcomes available to these people. What I'm going to show you has nothing to do with it, but it is something that could be, I think, a very interesting approach to this. And this is something I did for ERISA Advisory a couple of years ago, maybe 2014, if I remember right. And what they were interested in is what's the optimal level of a QLAC purchase for retirement income adequacy. Okay, again, has nothing to do with glide paths, but could very easily be modified to do the same thing. So what we did is, if you look at the grid on the horizontal axis, you see the 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and yes, I realize you can't go above 25 with QLACs, but they wanted to see if 25 was indeed a binding constraint or not. And then we also broke it down by age-specific income quartiles. So the people on the vertical axis on the top, the blue ones were the lowest income individuals, and the ones in the green on the bottom are the highest income. And the one thing, without even spending any time on the details, you can take one look at that chart and see that QLACs, these are the percentage change in our retirement readiness ratings. QLACs, by and large, are not a really good investment for the low-income individuals, which makes a tremendous amount of sense because they've already got so much longevity protection through Social Security that to not only pay the premium for it, but more importantly, lose the flexibility of being able to access those funds if they do come up with something like long-term care costs, makes a tremendous amount of difference. And you can go through and see for each income quartile, basically what's the sweet spot in terms of what's the overall optimal amount of your K balance you should use for a QLAC purchase. But again, it has nothing to do with going with the glide paths, but it'd be, I think, very, very easy to do the same kind of approach, looking at various combinations of TDF approaches where you want to start looking at how do we want to break this down? Are we going to start looking at whether or not they have defined benefit income? Do we want to look at whether they're active or frozen? Do we want to break this down by, well, obviously we want to break it down by age, we want to break it down by income, et cetera. So that's one thing I think we want to talk about going forward. More than happy. I've been talking off and on to Brett about this for a couple of years. Would be really, really interested in working with individuals at Capital Group on this if there is any interest. So I see I've now exceeded my time, but let me just throw it out there. Are there any questions or comments I could go over either on this possible glide path project or anything else I mentioned?
Jack, there's a big interest on the glide path project and custom glide paths, and so perhaps we might be able to reconvene with some of our institutional advisory team, since that's one of the big things that we are looking at, the impact of demographics on glide path, and I think that there would be a great interest in the research that you propose.
We'd love to do that. And let me just quickly, before I turn it back over to Lori, I know she's going to talk about the public DC project. For the question that came up at the very beginning, we will also be using this type of analysis once we start looking at the public DC information to combine the DB information that we have for the plan sponsors that are giving us the DC information. And I realize there's a lot of different plans and legacy and breakouts, et cetera, we have to cope with. But one of the things that we want to basically be able to come up with is using this model to look at the overall package in terms of both DC and DB on the public side for retirement income adequacy. So let me turn it over to Lori, and I know she's going to run through Pearl. And again, any questions, comments, just feel free to send me an email. Thank you.
Okay, I will go ahead and share my screen now. It's talk about the Public Retirement Research Lab. And again, thank you all for being a founding member. We just started this Public Retirement Research Lab really at the beginning of this year. And see if I can share my screen. Okay. So the Public Retirement Research Lab is a initiative that is a cooperation between EBRI and the National Association of Government Defined Contribution Administrators. And the crux of it is this public defined contribution universe that we're creating. We have, I believe, what's the number, Jack, that we're up to? We have, what is it, 51? Was that the number of plans that have committed to the Pearl so far?
Actually, we got a huge increase in the last week, and I think we're now up to 49. If
49?
memory serves.
Okay.
Yeah.
49. So, and there, there's very large state plans, some municipalities. So the number, we're talking millions and millions of participants in the database. Obviously, we want a large, much larger number of plans as well. But for having just gotten this kicked off the ground, we feel pretty good about the amount of data that we're already have committed. Longer term, we also want to do similar retirement income adequacy analysis that you saw Jack just show you based on our 401k data. We want to do the same type of thing for public plans. And we're having conversations with organizations like NASRA to get the DB data in as well, so we can have a more complete picture, but that's a longer term prospect. The immediate thing we want to do with the Public Retirement Research Lab is just understand how people are using their public plans, and it's very different from all observations from what we're seeing on the corporate side. We were just looking at some data on how, for example, participants are using the CARES Act provisions of the public side, and it seems to be much more prevalent for them to be using it, things like withdrawals on the CARES Act provisions and loans than on the corporate side. There's dramatic tenure differences for corporate and public, and of course, the prevalence of defined benefit. So that's why we think it's important to have a separate database and not do what the industry has done for so long, which is just kind of use 401k data and say, well, it's a proxy, because it really isn't. So the mission of the Pearl is to provide unbiased and actionable findings that allow plan sponsors, administrators, policymakers, and others to make better decisions about public retirement plans, just like we have for our 401k database. It's a central clearinghouse of public retirement plans. It will have a unique data set, as well as it will leverage EBRI researchers to mine that data. Being a Pearl founder, similar to being an EBRI member, is you will have greater access to the research, but as a founding member as well, you'll have a seat on our steering committee to set the direction of the Public Retirement Research Lab. You have seats on the Research Council to provide input into the direction of the Pearl research agenda and priorities. And also speaking on things like webinars. We had a 10-year webinar that we just had at the, I guess it was the beginning of July, where there was a speaking opportunity for Capital Group, and we hope to have many more of those as well. Really just showcase your thought leadership in this area, which I know is very important to you. And Sue also, thank you very much for all of your support, and Vince Ortega as well. Any questions on the Public Retirement Research Lab before we move to the research roadmap? There's a lot of slides here, but I think we've covered a lot of the territory. And this part of the conversation, I really want to just hear, where, from everything we're talking about, is there areas that we should be aware of that are important to Capital Group that you really want to see on the research agenda? So we look at the, what's coming up this year. We've talked about the consumer database, Do Good Savers Make Good Consumers, which is coming out in the summer. We talked about the CARES Act and the Financial Wellbeing Survey. Other things that are coming up as the year progresses, we're going to be looking at the intersection between health savings accounts and 401ks. When people invest in a health savings account, does it come at the cost of saving in the 401k, or what's that interaction look like? We also will be looking at the impact of hardship withdrawals. More of that research on retirement income adequacy. We talked about retirement spending profiles. We'll be doing a lot more work on that. things like modeling the impact of rising unemployment on employer-based health insurance, but we haven't talked much about our healthcare work, but there's a lot of that that's coming out in the summer as well. More on health savings accounts, its impact on retirement income adequacy. We'll be looking at the impact of long-term disability on retirement income adequacy. And even further ahead, we'll be doing a lot more with our 401k database, including things like if people are consistent participants in 401k plans, what does that look like? That's a pretty unique study that EBRI has done over time, and it really shows it gets rid of a lot of noise of kind of new enrollees. I mentioned trends in student loan debt, measuring the impact of financial wellness solutions, retirement asset holdings of American families, and consumer spending patterns over time. So we have a very full agenda, but let me pause here and see if there's anything that you are surprised is not on our research agenda or that you would like to see us add.
So this is Michael Bowman again from Capital Group. I wanted to see if it's possible to make a participant benchmark. So what we're hearing is you can't compare glide path to glide path. You can't compare target date to target date. You know, there's different needs for different plans, 457 versus 403B versus 401K versus 401A and the rest. But I wanted to see if we could, you know, if it's possible, and if it's not, and there's regulatory reasons why we can't, that we could take what the average 40-year-old making X amount of money, just range 50,000 to 60,000, what their retirement looks like in volatility, in total number of assets, and also return. So then we could start saying, let's just look what the participant averages per age group, and then let's benchmark that way. So is your participant above or below for this subsection their peers? For whatever reason, take all the noise out, just say a participant benchmark.
Michael, I've been doing that for years for all of our record keepers on the corporate side. Certainly that's something we're going to be doing for all the record keepers on the public DC side, hopefully by the end of this year. I suspect that's something that we could make available to any one of the EBRI members, if that's something that you'd be interested in.
Oh, that'd be, I didn't know that you guys were doing the corporate side. That'd be huge. I mean, that's really, when you talk about custom versus off the shelf, it says takes the noise away and say, this is what the average participant's doing. Is yours doing the same?
Right. Again, I can't, because of confidentiality, tell you who's in and who's not in the database, but as you can possibly guess, my number one concern professionally is keeping everybody that's giving me data as happy as possible. And that's something that they've always decided that they wanted from the very beginning in the mid-90s.
I'd love to see that. That's not something I've seen distributed, and I don't know what we can do or what we need to talk to you about, how we can start using it. But yeah, that's data that I think is helpful, whether it's public fund or corporate. You know, you're now doing apples to apples for participant, not glide paths or fund menus. So,
right.
I'm going to switch this for a minute, and you might already track this. I'd be really interested now and going forward, how many 401k plans or even just broader DC plans allow retirees to stay in plan and encourage. And if that, I'd like to see the delta going forward.
It seems like we're seeing more encouraging. Jack, you could speak to whether you've got that quantified, but I was at a SEBA meeting and they did a poll of the SEBA members, and it was like 3/4 said that they were now encouraging people to stay in the DC plan, in part because they're just, the economies of scale are getting killed because a lot of these plans are turning into net withdrawal situations because of the baby boomers leaving the plans, and they're realizing it's in the best interest of all of those participants to keep people in there if they can.
That's great, regardless of their motivation.
Tony, since we don't know who any of our employers are, and we've got over 110,000 of them, I can't do that kind of a survey meld, but what I have been doing for another EBRI member, and you'll probably be able to figure out who it is as I describe this, but they're very, very interested in what happens to the account balances when the employment status is severed. And even though they're primarily interested in this pre-retirement, I put all the databases together, all the contiguous years that I would need to basically, I think all I need to do for what you want is basically extend that to the retiree age segment. So I can't tell you who did it and who didn't, but I can certainly show you from a time series perspective who's had a relatively substantial change and how much difference that made.
That'd be great. Right, because I really don't care who it is. I'm curious as to the trend line because I have to feel like there is one. Maybe I'm just
right.
Any other thoughts in our few remaining minutes here? Well, thank you. This has been incredibly helpful. We love getting this kind of feedback and making sure that we're on track with our research. There's obviously plenty of opportunities along the year to give this kind of input as well, but love to get in front of our members and hear it directly from you like this. So thank you very much.
This was great from our end. Thank you to you and Jack and Zara. We really appreciate all the information today and appreciate all the information that we get from you regularly.
Terrific. Well, hopefully we'll eventually be able to see each other in person someday.
I sure hope so.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very
you.
much
Bye-bye.
for this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.